Good evening. William F. DeVault, U.S. National Beat Poet Laureate, Emeritus, and romantic poet of the internet, and a former denizen of Morgantown, West Virginia. Morgantown and I have always enjoyed a rather strange relationship, and I understand and respect that. But I decided that several years ago I would express elements of that relationship in a book called the Morgantown Suite Poems, which is initially published in 2005. There is a 2006 edition because I was chosen as a judge in 2005 for Poetry Out Loud, the state finals for West Virginia. And they admitted to me that when they were putting together the gift bags for the high school students, they passed over my book about West Virginia, the Morgantown Suite Poems, because of a single poem in it that they felt was a little racy for the kids, and went with a different book. So I put out a new edition missing that one poem so it would be better received at like the school level. And that's the edition I'll be reading from. Sorry, guys. It is almost 10 o'clock, and I said I'd start this reading at 10, which I will do. Just so you know, in the late 60s, my dad was getting ready to go to Korea for a year, and so we bought a house in Morgantown. He decided he was going to retire to Morgantown, which was his hometown, and I and the rest of the family spent a year there while he was in Korea. He came back. We then went to North Dakota, and then we came back to Morgantown, and I was there for the next, from 1969 through about 1980. I was there for a while. I met a lot of people, loved a lot of people, met some incredible people, because any town is like a church. It's built on the people. That's where it comes from. So, with no further ado, I'll launch into the book, and I'll probably give a little bit of dialogue between some of the poems to set the stage for them. The initial idea for this book came out in 2002. I was in town on my Love Gods of Forgotten Religion tour, did a couple gigs in town, and I thought, there's a lot of resonances here I should tap into. And at the time, Morgantown was going through some renovation. A lot of businesses had shut down, and they were having problems. And I was struck by the number of businesses that had been in place when I had initially lived there that were no longer downtown on High Street or in the surrounding area. And this is the poem Hollow Shells. The hollow shell of buildings, ghostly reminders of businesses that folded their tents and went down with the last recession, or fled to the malls that mark the perimeter of transient pride. All right, there's your intro. The next one's a little more intense. It's called The Spot Where She Died. My older brother, Robert, 2 years my elder, was engaged to one of my classmates, Carol Ann Little. And they were in a horrific traffic accident. She pretty much died instantly, although they kept her body alive for a few days. He's still alive, but he still carries the scars, both physically and emotionally, of that. And when I was in Morgantown in 2002, I went by the spot where the accident had occurred. I could have thrown a rock and hit the spot where she died. No, not in a hospital bed. Respirators finally turned off, lungs slowly losing their will, alone and trapped in the silent shell. But here in front of the store where she worked, when it was hills, not Ames, and the corner was less fettered with unsightly buildings. I was miles away, washing dishes at the hospital, waiting for 7:30 to go home and not do homework as they rushed them to the emergency room. He lived and lives a constellation of scars, marking how the kinetic laws of nature threw him along Monongahela Boulevard. She was gone before they reached the scene. Nearly 30 years have passed, and gravel piles and construction signs mark the spot where she died, in an instant remembered only by those she touched in life, and by those who read her epitaph. When I was there in 2002, I thought about how I needed to come to town and just walk around, reconnect. And this is the poem that came out of that. It's called I Will Walk These Streets Again. I will walk these streets again, roads that seemed irrelevant to a young man, now lined with memories and mysteries and questions not yet answered, still hanging on lips I never kissed, or kissed once too often for redemption. Here is where I saw the savage sun cut through clouds of sweat and stench that wrenched the soul and sealed control of destinies for a generation or more. And all the shadows faded in the light, night coming to mark their passing later. Here is where I watched the shifting moon rise and smile and hide me in the blue hues of thoughts made fantasies, made events I will not relinquish, even unto the next sphere, where there will not be more than a thought caught in the spindles of the evening stars. Streets of brick, of stone, of dirt, and paved to the end of the moment. Hills higher than dreams, dreams darker than clouds, clouds thicker than blood, blood softer than promises long forgotten and gone, on beyond the very furthest reach of all you teach and taught and fought for in my shallow youth. I will walk these streets again and see faces I have not seen since I was barely budding in a garden already crested with petals and leaves and thorns I have not worn or wondered on in too long. Songs lost to the winds that came from the whims of women and men and boys and girls that walked there as well. The next poem is a short little one about a street. I wish I could remember the name of it. Some of you right now listening probably do remember the name of it. There was a street one road up from South High Street that had been built by the WPA during World War II, and it was built with bricks. Well, after several decades, the bricks get displaced, and the writing on the road was something like writing, God, I don't know what to compare it to. It's called Street of Bricks. There's a street of bricks near where my girlfriend lives, dusty red uniform pieces of a jigsaw, assembled by hand, by men needing work, even if it meant raw hands and scraped fingertips and aching muscles and new shock absorbers 40 years later. The first girl I ever really kissed, we're gonna start naming names here, was a girl I met at church named Beth Fortuna. And we were walking at Krebs Park and we kissed, and it was nice. I mean, what do you say about a kiss? So, this is called Krebs Park After Dark. A metaphor for memory, a game that lovers play. Do you recall when shadows fall? What were the words to say? Too young to know the answers, too old to play the fool. Lips on lips, hands on hips, exceptions to the rule. Still reaching for our limits, still testing every line. Thoughts impure meet hands unsure, and a girl from Catholic school. For years, and Bob Wasson will bear me out on that, and I know he's on right now, I was a paper boy. Wiles Hill, Park Hills, that area. Loads of fun. And every morning I'd roll out of bed about 4:30, get my newspapers, and rain, shine, snow, cold, loose dogs, I delivered my newspapers. And it got me used to being a lifetime early riser. But what's the saying? Oh, it builds character. This is called 5 a.m. and a bag full of words. Rolling out of bed, cold floor, cold feet. Mismatched socks collected in the darkness to let my eyes rest just a moment longer. 85 copies of news already made old by the hours, wrapped in newsprint, tied with twine, and off into the morning, before night surrenders. The choking fog that smells of rotten eggs, stinging my nostrils as I climb Wiles Hill. Down roads and across lawns, dodging dogs and raindrops, taking out the occasional storm door window with a bad toss. Sorry about that. Hating that one dead-end street with no streetlights where lurks sufficient cover for the baying hound named Sherlock to charge from them. Pennies on the paper, greeting the dawn, getting the occasional card for Christmas, for splashing dewdrops on the lawn. I actually had fun, and it was good exercise. Those of you in my age range may remember the head shop, The Tribe. It moved once or twice, but I had friends who worked there, and my mother always cautioned me, don't go in there. There are people in there who do drugs. Some of my best friends worked there. And this I wrote on the occasion of 35 years since I had first encountered them. It's called The Tribe plus 35. The scent of patchouli and strawberry, mixed with sandalwood and coconut, a metaphor, or a mistake, taking shape in the mind of the lost soul, freedom as a new religion. Walls decorated with pointed images of war and peace and love and music. Lenin and cartoon mating ducks, trying to find some shelter in times of great uncertainty. Now you are a bar, where truth is sought but never caught in the bottom of a bottle. Youthful exuberance for pointless protests. Une génération perdue. True only to itself. Now, any former prom queens out there, do not take personal offense at this next poem. It's just several times I've run into women in Morgantown who I knew back when, who their prom queen days were the peak of their life. And peaking early can be a problem. It's called faded prom queens. Drawn face and the trace of smoke obscuring memory. Numbing nothing but a slow and endless slide into yet another endless gray night or week or month or year or life. Marking time only by a paycheck too small to pay the bills after beer and butts. After the ever after that seemed to pass you by like prom night. A question from unanswered suitors. A few years ago in Morgantown, not back when I was in high school, but later on, there was a place, somebody told me it had closed, called the Zen Clay Tea Garden. Nice little shop. I actually did some readings there. And this poem, Interlude at the Zen Clay Tea Garden, was about doing a reading there while on the Love Gods of a Forgotten Religion tour. Let's see, I did that one. I did 123 Pleasant Street, and I did the Blue Moose Cafe in Morgantown that year. Sit with me and tell me what is holding up your heart. The secrets and the sentience you speak of when alone, the people and philosophies that have all played a part, the victories you are proud of, the failures you atone. Sit with me and sip your tea and tell me of the day you first discovered how it feels to see the rising sun. And know that there is constancy in things some people say, and lies and lingering anger, even from those who have won. I'll listen to your words, and then to words behind the words. I'll measure you, your eyes and hands, for what you want to say. I'll listen to your change of voice at the sight of random birds that live their lives oblivious to what drama is in your day. And if we part as lovers, or if we part as friends, I'll still consider time well spent once the moment ends. Gonna drop another name, people. I don't think she's watching right now, but she might watch this later. When I was in high school, to my taste, the most perfect girl in high school was, I'm going to get in so much trouble for admitting this, Carol Wiedebusch. And I never spoke to her in high school, not even once. Several years later, I ran into her. She was a customer of my mother's who was a seamstress. And we fell to talking, and we got along pretty well. And I was dazzled that she even knew my name. So I wrote this poem called 4C, but yes, it's about Carol. Suddenly you've been promoted to about the speed of light, a bright, brisant spark that harkens memories, buried like the old yearbook you didn't sign, as I was too shy and in awe of the all-too-perfect incarnation of whatever the muses domained dance. Avatars are not meant to be touched, but thought upon, quite oft, and remembered soft, with a pleasant smile of fond recall. Morgantown and I often had a question of indifference, an indifference of opinion, let us say. Once I had set my scales in junior high and high school that I wasn't going to cooperate with literary magazines, and gotten into a few fights with my editors when I worked on the Red and Blue Journal at Morgantown High. There was a sense that I could write a Nobel Prize winning thing and it would be, So, I wrote this poem called Matthew 10:14, which was an admonition to prophets to shake the dust from their feet if a town did not receive them well. The dust from my feet falling back from whence it came, as I take back my peace and shame every building, every street, for the sins of the indifferent. I'll not linger where there is no sense of welcome. No place by the fire to become my corner, the place I dare spend moments I can never repent. Show me to the gate, that I may now seek solace in dark and endless wilderness, and a most uncertain fate. No trace or trail to show where I went. Yeah, I was a little pissed off at him. Recently, I took a tour of Morgantown High School with their principal, and he's promised to have me back and speak to some classes and so on. And I had to wait this many thousands of years to get attention, but at the same time, I'll take it. Those of you who may remember it, Morgantown Junior High School, that big old building that a long time ago had actually been Morgantown High, and now it's a parking lot. But it was an interesting place, and we used to play slush ball in the parking lot out back. Those were softballs that had had the crap beat out of them, so that even if you could hit them mightily, they would travel about 30 feet and not take out any windows. But Morgantown Junior High School, remnant to an ancient time now past, lair to dragons and their tutors, cast in stone and playing mushball in the lot, from where the softened spheres placed window shots to shower teachers' cars with splintered glass. At lunchtime, we'd surround the pit where jerseyed gladiators waged berserk fit to sail the sphere through tangled net and earn their triumph for the sweat as caricatured wise men and women held class. The stones have been thrown down to clear the way for less respected veneer, or parking garage and traffic court that makes for us a different sport, far from wide stairs with rails of brass. Those of you from Morgantown know Sunnyside. For the longest time, Sunnyside was synonymous with drunken revelry after football games. In fact, drunken revelry almost any time. It was right at the bottom of Stewart Street, and it was the bar district. I understand that's moved around a little bit since then. This is called Sunnyside Revels. Prophets would be bound and burnt if they were to engage this crowd that echoes cries of victories proud that by their efforts never earned. It always bugs me that people go, we're number one when they didn't play. But number 1 or 2 and 10, they need to rationale to play, to still the sorrows gathered when, to seek new worlds from homes away. A rabble in an ethered mood that seeks to slow wild oats en masse, more mob than crowd or cultured brood, as citizens not yet to pass. I'm going to mention Bob Wasson. We played a lot of wiffle ball and sandlot football back in the day. And Bob Wasson, who just lived down the block from me, was an incredible softball player. Incredible. He could hit that sphere and it would go, and you may not ever find it. But he also ended up recruiting us for sandlot football games. We played at least 3 games a year. There was the Pneumonia Bowl. No. There was the Turkey Bowl on Thanksgiving Day. After you've had your Thanksgiving dinner, come down and play rough and tumble football at Mountaineer Field, because usually there was nobody there and we could use the whole field. The second one was on Christmas Day, same rules, and that was called the Pneumonia Bowl. And then the one on New Year's Day was called the Double Pneumonia Bowl. This one's called Fourth and Dirt Clod. The quarterback in gray and black steps back and seeks his sprinting vent that will not ease the coming rush, but injury may well prevent. On hardened dirt and astroturf, it matters not where we would spar. With friendly rage this war we'd wage. Then hurry home, piled in Bob's car. If you've been listening to my recordings, or if you've seen any of my tours, you've probably run into this poem. It is a true story. It's called First Date Blues. There's even a nice musical version of it out on YouTube. These are all true stories, which explains why I didn't date a lot in high school. I have the first date blues because the girl I choose to ask out already has a guy who doesn't take kindly to skinny, four-eyed know-it-alls hitting on his girl. So Monday morning at the bus stop will be pretty normal. I have the first date blues because the girl I choose to ask out didn't show up. And when I call her, she tells me she didn't remember and not to call anymore. So Monday morning in English class will be pretty normal. I have the first date blues because the girl I choose to ask out has a brother who thinks it's funny that anyone would ask his sister out, and he has a big mouth. So the rest of the semester, the laughter in the halls will be pretty normal. I have the first date blues because the girl I asked to the prom has to cancel because she's pregnant with her ex-boyfriend's baby, and she has to leave town. So the rest of my senior year at Morgantown High will be pretty normal for me. I did eventually go to that prom with an alternate who broke up with me the next morning. When I was at the Blue Moose, one of the servers really impressed me. She just had so much personality. I have no idea what her last name was. I have no idea where she is now. I have no idea if she's ever seen this poem. I'd actually written several poems about local establishments, and then one of them pissed me off, and I actually cut a full cycle of poems about them from this book and got rid of them. So I can be vindictive in my own subtle way. This one's called Danielle. Danielle serves attitude with the coffee she barters to the men who wander in every morning to see her dance a strange ballet for them. Half flirtation, half static, with a sliver of gratitude for showing up to give her something to do with her morning. Trading barbs with the customers who come there as much for her sleek physique as for the smell of South American bean soup with cream and sugar, while they read their newspaper while she's watching, and watch her when her back is turned. My mother's mother, my grandmother, who we called Nan Nan, lived on Locust Street. And between the buildings there were very narrow alleys. Well, when I was 5 or 6 years old, I could slip down those alleys. Nowadays, it terrifies me to think that I ever slipped down those narrow alleys. But we'd play hide and seek or tag or whatever, and I would take advantage of it when I was 5 or 6 or 7. And this is called the alley down on Locust Street. Between two buildings, I used to glide, an escape route for hide and go seek that a skinny 5-year-old could just maneuver. A ferret in red ball jets, breaking right at the light to vanish from the sight of those who thought that counting to 20 wouldn't be enough time for me to vanish. Oily, oily oxen free. I was with a group of friends at Cheat Lake, and a few of them were swimming. I came in full clothes, blue jeans, dress shoes, so forth and so on. And I bet that I could jump off the big rock we were all sunning ourselves on into the water, and they were like, "You're an idiot." So I proved I was an idiot. Lost a shoe in the muck, which I never recovered. Anthropologists a few thousand years from now will find it and go, "Boy, they were idiots." Got soaked to the bone. Even destroyed a couple IDs in my wallet. This poem's called Ballistic Arc. The physics behind my leap were imperfect, as must have been my reasoning that June day when I took the bet I wouldn't get wet, dressed from toe to turtleneck. What the heck? And I threw myself off the rock, overlooking the cheat, considering the wisdom only on the downward point just before I broke the plane of the cold water, to descend rapidly until I felt my shoe sink into the muck of ages. For a moment thinking, I might get stuck, and one day, in future times, they'll find my body and say, "What an idiot." My first serious girlfriend and I made plans to get married. We really did. We were together for about 5 years, starting just after the end of high school. And we would sit in the car and we would talk about our futures. And at one point, we promised, as reverently as anybody in a church ever has, that this was a forever relationship. I'm sure a lot of people have done that. But this poem is called The Taking of Vows. The taking of vows. The breaking of vows. Measuring our passions in the fashion of fate, waiting for something to be better than nothing, sealing the healing of old wounds of hate. My father had 3 brothers, Francis, Earl, and Fred. Fred was a coal miner and strawberry farmer. Earl, for a while, had a peach and cherry grove, and also worked as, I believe, a custodian. And my Uncle Francis, who worked in the coal mines, went off to World War II and died in the Battle of the Bulge. I never got to meet him. But this poem is called Fresh Peaches in Uncle Earl's Trees. Plucked from the tree as the sun warmed their skin, a fragrance exotic, sweet and musky. So tempting we'd sometimes eat the skin as well. Despite old wives' tales, they'll line our stomachs and we die. True story. At one time, peaches were known as, I don't remember what the term was for them back then. I know tomatoes were considered both peaches, but there was a legend that if you ate peach skins, they would stick to the lining of your stomach and you'd die. Now, for those of you who are about my age, you remember the joy of the American Drive-In Theater. And one of the American Drive-In theaters near Morgantown was the Blue Horizon, where actually I worked at for about a year. But that never the same. This is called Making Out at the Blue Horizon. A private luxury suite for 2 in the back, while the couple in the front had to make do with the hump that all but forced them to go horizontal at first kiss. Be it Ricky Nelson or Don Knotts or Linda Blair, we weren't there for the entertainment being projected on the screen, but what passed between teenage lovers, trying hard to find out what they weren't supposed to be teaching us about in Mrs. Watts's biology class. My 10th grade biology teacher was Mrs. Watts, and I always got the feeling she was a little uncomfortable teaching us about sex. I've got some great stories about her class, but that's not in here. The face on page 1B. My mom always looked on page 1B to see what the local news was, who died, who got married, whatever. And once or twice she would call me and say, "Hey, so-and-so died." And I'd actually cut out the obits of kids I'd gone to school with and pasted them in my yearbooks. And then my second ex-wife didn't send me my old books when I asked her to, and they were destroyed by Hurricane Katrina. Boy, The face on page 1B. He's in my math class, or was. More information on the obituary page. No matter if he was a good guy or the devil himself, he'll be mourned and people will say, only the good die young, which they'll regret saying when they're 87 and they've proven their case. But the face on page 1B of the newspaper is impossibly young to be making the move from yearbook to the obits. Is it wrong to be glad that it's not me? The cover of this book, which is backwards to you guys, is a picture of me in the spring of 1974. I had gone to class and then met my girlfriend down on Woodburn Circle, and I always wore shoes. I wore shoes everywhere. I probably would have slept in them if I could have gotten away with it. And she convinced me to take off my shoes and socks and enjoy the grass. Well, a little bit later I headed home, and I had to climb Stewart Street, which is a very steep hill that went on forever. But I walked up on the sidewalk. I had a jacket on and an umbrella in case it rained. There was supposed to be rain. So I tied the shoelaces on the handle of the umbrella, hung it over my shoulder like a hobo with their pack, and was walking up Stewart Street when suddenly this little yellow Volkswagen screeches to a halt and somebody yells, "Hold it right there." It was Ron Rittenhouse, a very well-regarded and award-winning photographer for the local newspapers. And he saw a great opportunity here. So he took a series of pictures of me walking up the street, barefoot, my shoes on the handle of my umbrella, walking up the hill. And they put that in the paper just a few days later to announce spring was here. And then a few other times they used it to announce spring was here or something similar. The funny thing was my girlfriend at the time, the one I'd met at Woodburn Circle, Nancy Lucebrink, the one I was with for 5 years, she was walking to school once from South High Street, and as she walked under the old Citizens Bank sign, which had the time and the temperature displayed on it, it was 0 degrees, and she was bundled up against the cold. And Rittenhouse stopped her and got photos of her standing under that with the 0 degrees. And they used that picture, or one of the pictures from that sequence, more than once in the local papers to indicate, hey, it was cold. So I was spring and she was winter. Probably why it didn't work out in the end. But this one is called Woodburn Circle Barefoot. Halls of ivy, the learning hives where busy bees transform their lives through book and lecture, thought and word, finding the wisdom behind the absurd. And here we are, for just one dance, curling up by well-cared plants between our classes, sharing joy, long-legged girl and barefoot boy. Learning on a different plane, not caring what might yet remain beyond the halls where teachers teach, thoughts we thought, once out of reach. The moments flee like startled crows, your breath on my face, the grass in my toes, and off I am, my learning done, warmed by your arms and the lingering sun. This poem is called Musing in the Shadows of the Seasons. Writer's thought, caught on the spindles of time, weaving webwords into a bedspread worthy of a goddess, warm and thick as maple sap on a cold morning, the sweetness so subtle that only the connoisseur can taste the image it imparts. The mystery that it starts in kindling the heart to dream dreams of spring and summers, yet unborn. Recalling yesterday. So many moments measured in the currency of time, in the memory of our learnings, yet the yearnings of our crimes for every fear and rage or love we spend or beg and aim and alm, we barter views and visions, then closed our outstretched palm. My first serious girlfriend lived at 332 South High Street. I can say that now. That was a billion years ago. It was right on the corner, Dorsey and South High Street. and it's where we spent a lot of private time. I drove by the house today to see what I felt when I knelt to pray and summon the angels and demons to play, with the memories burned at the instant of life, when love was a world and a word, attained by the few who had wandered in from the rain and sought the sweet shelter of hope, not in vain. I was to be husband, you were to be wife. Though what we made was love, I am certain time played with the sets and the lights and the curtains, and transformed the romance to tragedy, for in the judgment of fools errors were inevitable. Time has passed, and tears are long lost by the dry winds, to the dry winds, and masks of new rolls, tossed to us by the caprice of time and passion's frost of ages immemorable and innumerable. When I visited Morgantown High School a couple months ago, I insisted upon getting to see room 113. That was my homeroom throughout high school. Mrs. Davis, who was the widow of the former principal, was my homeroom teacher. She taught English. And she was a character. Definitely a character. Homeroom 113. Mrs. Davis held court, and we, for sport, squirmed and mocked her best efforts as we placed our youthful energies in direct conflict with her best intentions. Mentions of detentions and expulsion notwithstanding. I almost never write a poem by request, but when I was working at Farmers and Merchants Bank, one of my co-workers, Charlotte, was getting married, and she asked if I would write a poem for her. Both her and her fiance had been previously divorced, and that kind of laid the groundwork for this poem called Charlotte's Song. You never need answer the past. The questions it may ask are meaningless when the next sun rises, and the yesterdays fall beneath the tread of the tomorrows. Don't sell your soul for riddles. The answers are what you need, far more than a puzzled pause of confusion, or the look of silent embarrassment sorrows. Our destinies once lay on different paths, but roads have a strange and wonderful way of merging just beyond the next hill, and now we glide through life together on a single trail. Nothing in this life is truly free, but you'll find my love freely given to you in great modesty. It is all I have to offer, yet beside it, the sun shall pale. I sincerely hope they're still together. That was a while ago. That was 40-some years ago. Now to the other side of it. At one point, after I broke up with my first serious girlfriend, I got involved with a woman I should not have gotten involved with on several levels. And this is the poem I wrote about the relationship. It's called Arachne and Red Lace. Arachne and red lace, I wish that the memory would perish, so that the venom borne by metal fangs would leave these veins. A fire unworthy, a passion, and an arrogant weakness not to cherish, but to serve as an example to those who dare to tread the spun chains of gossamer pheromones. They look so fragile when distant, but they are stronger than cobalt steel. And should a man seek his vanity in seizing them for a swift moment, he will find that they turn that instant into an eon, a lifetime of scorched emotion and ravaged sanity. The venom is sweet and fiery. It answers prayers and fulfills fantasies that none dare even whisper except within the spinneret's weave. It makes a mockery of your heart and a trap of the tender seas you once treasured. It makes the dead, for the living, grieve. The crimson timepiece is a friend when the desire for the fire drives us on. Arachne urging with practice, spontaneity, and thirst for the blood of new paramours, for soon she tires of your taste and leaves you in her path, pale and cursed. Yeah, I think I was a little negative after that relationship. It took a while to get over. Here's an interesting set of two poems I wrote back to back. First one's called Yesterdays. The second one is called Yesterdays Revisited. They take a slightly different tack upon memory and experience. Learn to live with your regrets. Swallow your pride and carry inside all the crosses you have made. Cry just once for the yesterdays. Steel against the fears of the mockery of the tears. And be thankful for having seen the past parade. Having seen the pictures, I knew you as a child. How happily you played amid the flowers, submitting not to gloom or pain or the powers of those who would curse you for every smile. I remember how I felt when I was that age. The world was warmer then, or so it seemed, and every day was holiday, if we so deemed the reality. Don't close the book. Leave in the page. If one smile may grant you immortality, then you shall live 1,000 endless lives from those years. Let us not forget how it felt back then. Dry the tears that come tomorrow. Our children will not need them. One of the shorter poems I ever wrote, Autumnal Memory, is about my father. It was written years before he passed. He did pass a few years back. The smell of burning leaves always reminds me of my father. A good man, honest and kind. All my girlfriends, who ever met him, fell in love with him. But I saw him first. I had a childhood friend, Michelle Tomasky, who died in a car accident. And I wrote this poem about her death. It's called Funeral Home. A child is born. She now is dead. And over her form warm tears we shed, but tears lend not eternal life to friend or son or loving wife. Like liquid gems, the brine now falls. It fills the room with silent calls. Swollen eyes bleed the purest of tears when before us we see our incarnate fears. Over these small and wasted shells, our tears cascade, but no one tells. Oh, we're starting to get into the heavy stuff. Good. Next up is Penance. A lot of people don't understand that the poem was written about Morgantown, about experiences in my life where I made mistakes and put myself back together. I wasn't a bad kid. I mean, I wasn't out drunk driving, doing drugs, raping cheerleaders, stuff like that. But, I wasn't the Saint William that some people painted me. Against the odds, against the gods forced on us by friend or foe, we fight. Beyond mere will, where weapons kill more than just flesh, slaying, truth, and light. We have been cast as tumbling dice amid the mortals that repel us, that would sell us for a smile from cold idols carved of ice. We have fallen, and have risen, and taken penance given, every mile. This next is a triptych, that is to say 3 poems. It's to a friend of mine, Melissa Andes, who was in a horrific traffic accident and was crippled by it. And by sheer force of will, she put herself back together. She's also one of the girls from the earlier poem, First Date Blues. She's the one with the brother who thought it was funny. Because Melissa and I were 2 different animals. I was the good boy. She was the wild child. It's called Melissa, a Remembrance. 1. A complicated girl would be a kindly thing to say, one given to her female wiles to win and will her way. I never really knew how she played it was a pose, but people who would call her wild, well, there were some of those. I flirted with her once or twice. She gave as well as got, but never did I know for sure just what the bad girl thought of the good boy who never found the nerve to step inside the line. She drew around herself, then laughed. Perhaps a warning sign. I dated a girl from south of town and walked South High Street to Promised Land and cast my eyes over and down to see the creek the high bridge spanned. I was one of many who heard when Melissa sailed out over the rail to plunge in car against hope inured. Her spirit, though, it did not fail. Confounding those who swore she'd fall, she gained her feet and walked again. She walked on throughout it all, throughout the obstacles and pain. 3. My mother got the call today that told her that she'd passed away. That spirited girl with copper hair, of slender limbs and countenance fair, who made of me a point of mirth, who rode my back o'er broken earth, long story, who fell and rose to prove her heart, and in her time chose to depart. Got a couple poems coming up about people I hung with in high school. There was a group of us who, when we got to Mr. Dilgard's American Studies class on the second floor, it looked out over the sidewalk that came from the cafeteria back to the main building at Morgantown High. And there was a group of us. No, I'm not going to give names. Who would lean out the window and make comments among ourselves about the girls who walked by. Some of them were clever and some of them were crude. Hold it, there are names in this poem. I guess I have to identify the people. Dave Day, Dave DeLugas, Ray Ponceroff, Tom Harley, and I. Those were the 5. Hanging with the guys. From American Studies, we studied the lot of the girls we knew and the girls we thought were pretty or sexy or definitely hot as they walked back to classes from lunch. Day was there, and DeLugas and Ray and Harley et alia. What more can I say? We were jury and lawyer in our own special way, and we defined and defiled with a thought or a word. 2 stories below us, they hadn't a clue of what we were saying, of what we thought we knew, of what lay in the future for the many and the few. But we knew what we liked, and we meant them no harm. Soon Mr. Dilgard would enter the room, and our laughter would turn to a silence of doom, as assignments were due and pretests would loom, or the guys with the eyes who had chaired the parade. One of the guys who hung with me during those sessions was Dave DeLugas. He was a sweet, kind, fun guy. And he passed away a few years ago, and I wrote this poem about him called Echoes of a Laugh. Has it really been so many years since last I heard you laugh? A score or more I count since then, a score and then a half. And wonders come, please count them not, and I reflect on times that pass like grass through scything blades as we repent our primes. The memories, they fade, and yet the bouquet lingers still. And we are held to moments lost, to fate or whim or will. I will admit that I will miss the thought of your laugh lost, but will retain a humble grain of joy from our paths crossed. Sonnet, a vintage passion. When the taste of your tears and the texture of your fingertips, I recall all the images of that afternoon so far in past and past, that there are children with children who were not yet cast in their mother's wombs when these dreams last walked, lips parted in silent prayer as lights merged against the shadows, the heat completing the alchemy, banishing thought and sorrows. Sweat ran like the melting of ice off a cliff wall in springtime, and leaving us a taste on virgin palates of an impossible wine. Tongue to lips and hands to hips, and memory does not slip away from a sacrifice that is willing and beautiful as you were that day. Out of a heart given and proven in a moment of lust consecrated, all of my memories of you are bound in that perfect moment, fated to be snapshots in a mind still warm and plastic for the impression you left in the attic of dreams, where we still share a vintage passion. I went to Calvary Baptist Church, and it's a good church. And among our more famous people there when I was there was my Sunday school teacher, Bobby Bowden. Some of you may have heard of him. He had something to do with football. But I also worked Vacation Bible School every summer. And if you guys don't know what Vacation Bible School is, you missed out a lot. Kool-Aid and cookies and stories of yore, discarded gum wads that stick to the floor, parents just glad for the moment's escape, dropping their kids on the way to the lake. Crayons and paints and colored balloons, hours fly by and are ended too soon. Back to their homes and chores to be done, while parents, we hope, complete what's begun. I always wondered, we're sitting there teaching them Bible stories and stuff like that. When they get home, are their parents continuing the education? Don't know. Getting the beat on Pleasant Street. 123 Pleasant Street was a club. I don't know if it still exists in Morgantown. It was at 123 Pleasant Street. It was a nice club. Did some readings there. They also had a lot of rock bands. Getting the beat on Pleasant Street. Uncapping the crap on a room full of people who actually showed up for poetry. Embryonic classic rock band looking for their sound in the next room. The stage a womb that lets you get it together so you can run at the big time. Not recycled rockabilly or bluegrass played tongue-in-cheek, so chic. But a bunch of guys who tried to disguise they're looking for a way up and out, so they aren't weekend idols while working at the Dairy Mart. Late night crowd is getting loud, so I'm going to wrap it up. But it's nice to know that there's more than decaf in this cup. I took piano lessons for a few short months while I was in high school. My piano teacher was a gentleman by the name of Ralph Federer. His sister, Miss Federer, was the music teacher I had in grade school. A bizarre coincidence is he would have a stack of music books, and you'd come in and say, "Oh, I want to learn this song." And he would right there transpose it into a key that you could play based on your level of skill. Pretty remarkable fellow. He charged $2 a lesson for piano lessons and lived at the Hotel Morgan. The last song we transposed was The Green Leaves of Summer. And the last line he transposed to be picked up the next week was, "A time to be planning, a place for to die." Swear to God. 5 days later, they found him dead in his hotel room. He was not a young man. But this is a poem I wrote after hearing him pass, called Tired Hands at the Keyboard. In his second-story studio, Mr. Federer is sweeping the keys of ancient ivory, trying hard to teach me how to play with two hands. Good luck. My having all the musical ability of a desk lamp doesn't seem to faze this gentle gentleman who lives at the Hotel Morgan and takes $2 a lesson. An hour's worth of hourglass sand for an innate gift and a lifetime of training coming down to me, making a mess of Big Yellow Taxi. And then he died. In the middle of teaching me Greensleeves. The final line transposed into a key I could actually play in. A time to be planning, a place for to die. Which in retrospect is a little creepy. Pardon me? No, that's not coronavirus. That's just my throat. There's a street in Morgantown called Falling Run. It's incredibly steep. Incredibly steep. I would walk it every day to and from school, which is probably why I had leg muscles that could hold up small planets. This is called Falling Run. There was a time when my day was defined by the long, hard climb up Falling Run Road, a metaphor for life, a tale of human endurance. Impossible, impractical path if one's load was too great or if you were not used to it. Those West Virginia hills, killers in blacktop, no sidewalks to separate you from those few drivers who seem to think they don't have to stop for pedestrians in their path, presuming the shell of aluminum and glass grants them anonymity from identity or obligation or threat of hell for all their foolishness. And in your head the witty repartee you'd like to shout as they pass lays unspoken as you continue skyward, your stride unbroken. My Aunt Almy had many acres at her farm, And when she was in her early 70s, one of the coal companies came to her and said, "Hey, we want to strip mine your land. We want to buy it." She said, "Well, where will I live?" They said, "Tell you what," she was in her 70s, "we'll pay you for it, and then when you die, we'll strip mine it." Okay. I believe she lived to 104, which I'm sure pissed off some people. But her farm eventually became completely overgrown with tall blackberry bushes. And we would go there during blackberry season, and we would pick dozens of quarts, dozens of gallons probably, of fresh blackberries, and then go home and pick the ticks off us. And this is called blackberry season. Plump and sweet, an orchard of delicious wild fruit, waiting to be harvested, guarded only by the thorns and the ticks and the thorns, that will stick in your skin and make you wonder if mom's cobbler is really worth the blood, sweat, toil, and tears as you fill decapitated milk jug after decapitated milk jug with the fruit of the vine's labors. My friend Alan and several other of my friends, Alan McDonald, I met him right after I moved to Morgantown. He worked at the tribe for a while. We all kind of hung out with the same group. And one year it was determined that we would put together our own marching band at Morgantown High School, which we called the Mighty Mohegan Marching Kazoo Band. We were terrible. We would form a square on the field. Our announcer would announce what shape we would be forming next. We'd walk out 10 steps, turn around, walk back 10 steps back into the square, then do the song. Because we couldn't do all the formations. A moment of glory in a year full of doubt. The outcasts and rebels all marching about while they hum and they buzz like a sawmill in heat, making mock of precision, 100 left feet. Formations that altered not at all for the crowd, but our sense of absurd, in a word, makes us proud. As we march behind Doug, his baton all afire, we have our one season, and then we retire. Our marshal, Doug Yost, I think was his name, used a flaming baton. PK. For those of you who wondered about this, if you went to high school with me, you know who it was about. It was about Rosa Seabury. She was tall. She was gorgeous. She was a preacher's kid. She wasn't the wildest girl at school, but she was always trying to bend the rules a little bit. I remember her parents used to make her wear these really long skirts, and she would get the ones that button up, and when she'd get to school, she'd unbutton half the buttons. Nice legs. There ought to be a law against a preacher's kid that hot. The sins she spins with but a smile remind me that I'm not supposed to be considering those long and tawny legs. But that question is not all that her mere presence seeks to beg. I know she feels the pressure of the title she must bear, while the boys who sit around her contemplate her underwear, and she is placed between the rock and hardened place to dwell, betwixt the blue horizon and the vivid shades of hell. She smiles and comments on her plight and takes it all in stride, though I could only guess at the mess she is inside. Placed in between the duty and the booty to endure, the legacy of mortality, uncertain and unsure. Fireflies. When I was a kid, you could go out in the yard, collect 100 of them. And then, of course, you'd be stupid and leave them in their jar overnight and they'd all die. This is called Fireflies Rising. Warm June evening, and the only stars are not in the sky, for bits of their magic have fallen and rise on blackened wings to hover inches from outstretched fingers, seeking to harvest inspiration and store it for a night in a mason jar with nail holes in the lid to keep away whatever still lingers in the night. It was ritual. After Friday night football games, we'd all get in the car, we'd drive around, and people would yell stuff out the windows. We weren't the kind who would throw stuff out or try and hit people or start fights, but we would yell stuff at people. And some of the people who are going to hear this will recognize the fact that they were among those. My personal favorite was, "Hey, tired of walking? Run a while." It's called Cruising After the Game. Don't worry, we're getting close to the end. We kicked the crap out of Fairmont West by 100 points or more, So now we get to celebrate, to amplify the score. We drive around till almost 12 and shout out to the skies, flirtations to the pretty girls and put-downs to the guys. From Walnut Street to Spruce Street, from Pleasant onto High, we're not as cool as we think we are or as clever as we try. But that our boys look down the hawks or bees or something green gives us the license to propose to pedestrian acts obscene. At traffic lights or turning right to circle round again, we vent our steam in clouds aloud before we pack it in. Where lays memory? Whether the path is soft and warm, like rare moss when the sun finds a hole in the canopy in the woods at Cooper's Rocks, or rough and brutal like barefoot stepping off a curb where just the night before indifferent children threw their empty beer bottles, it is still the way home. Where lays memory? First kisses and a slush ball upside the head, church picnics and waiting for the tow truck, Veterans Day parades and lemonade too sweet sometimes, or tart as crab apples too tempting to a curious child. It is still the way home. Where lays memory? And more than flesh, or money, or glory, or fame, memory is all we can take across the river on our final voyage. My amazing daughter, Perry, Perelandra Michelle Arthur DeVault, was born in Morgantown. And this is a small poem about my delight when she was born. 10 fingers, 10 toes. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and a cute little nose that she can't see beyond. And look, she just yawned. Amazing the changes, how the world rearranges for 10 fingers, 10 toes, and a cute little nose. This is the final poem. Quit cheering. It's called Local Talent. It's about all these incredibly talented people who played at local clubs and bars and coffee houses, who had their moments, but it never really got anywhere. Maxwell's was a local coffee house that often had talent. I never did a reading there. It just never worked out on the schedule. This is called Local Talent. I heard her sing at Maxwell's. I heard her sing so clear. I heard her at the Blue Moose, and her voice near brought a tear. I hear she's playing Rosewood sometime later in the fall. Wish I could recall her name. I sure wish I could, at all. She sings the song she wrote that reminds me of night, that reminds me of walking down the road by pale moonlight. I know I'd know her voice. It hasn't been that long. Wish I could recall her name and what she calls that song. Thank you all very much for joining me. It has been an honor. Yes, I have a little counter in the corner that shows me how many people are actively watching at any given time, but don't worry. I'm not going to blame you. Thank you, Bob, for the applause. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to sign off now, and this will be available on Facebook for the rest of Recorded History, plus it's going to end up on YouTube on the William F. DeVault channel. So I really appreciate it from all of you. That was emotionally draining, because those were a lot of memories that are intense for me. Take care, all. God bless.